The Rosetta Stone is one of the most famous artifacts in the world, celebrated as the key that unlocked ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Discovered in 1799, this inscribed slab-bridged languages and scripts, allowing modern scholars to rediscover a lost writing system. Here are 30 fascinating facts about the Rosetta Stone, spanning its history, linguistic significance, and the archaeological intrigue surrounding it, presented in an engaging, accessible way. The Rosetta Stone was found by Napoleon's French troops on July 15, 1799, during fortification works in Egypt. It was embedded in the wall of Fort Julien, near the town of Rosetta, Rashid, in the Nile Delta. Accounts of the discovery are a bit vague, but the widely accepted story is that soldiers noticed the slab while expanding the fort's foundations. It had been repurposed as building material. The stone's name comes from Rosetta, modern Rashid, in northern Egypt, the nearest town to the discovery site. In European accounts, the French name Pierre de Rosette, Stone of Rosetta, stuck, and Rosetta Stone became its enduring moniker. The Rosetta Stone we know is actually a fragment of a bigger stele. It was found broken and incomplete. Roughly the upper third is missing, along with a portion of the bottom. Scholars estimate the original stele stood about 149 centimeters, nearly 5 feet, tall with a rounded top, likely depicting the pharaoh and Egyptian gods. The Rosetta Stone is the lower part of that monument. The top part, with perhaps 14 more lines of hieroglyphs and carved figures, has never been found. The stone bears inscriptions in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. These 3 texts all convey the same decree issued in 196 BC, just written in different writing systems. Hieroglyphs were the traditional sacred script of Egypt's priests. Demotic was the everyday Egyptian script of the time, and Greek was the administrative language used by the Macedonian Greek rulers of Egypt. When the Rosetta Stone was discovered, no one could read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The knowledge had been lost for centuries, but scholars could still read ancient Greek. The fact that the Greek inscription matched the Egyptian texts provided an invaluable translation key. In other words, the Rosetta Stone became the code breaker that eventually allowed linguists to finally decipher hieroglyphic writing. The content of the Rosetta Stone isn't magical or mysterious. It's basically political propaganda from 196 BC. The stone proclaims a decree issued by a council of Egyptian priests affirming the royal cult, divine status, of Pharaoh Ptolemy V Epiphanes. In essence, the priests are praising this young king and listing his good deeds to show their support and legitimize his rule. Ptolemy V was a boy king. He inherited the throne at about 5 years old and was officially coronated at age 12. The decree on the Rosetta Stone heaps flattery on the teenager. It reminds people that despite his youth and the turmoil of his early reign, his parents had been murdered in a court conspiracy. Ptolemy V has dedicated to the temple's revenues in money and corn, and has undertaken much outlay to bring Egypt into prosperity. In short, it's ancient PR, assuring everyone that the young pharaoh is generous, pious, and restoring order in Egypt. Far from containing mystical secrets, the Rosetta Stone's text is actually a dry administrative decree. It enumerates things like tax exemptions, donations to temples, and instructions to erect statues in honor of Ptolemy V. One science writer quipped that the text recounts a rather dull affair, essentially a list of royal benefactions, which just happened to be the key to a much greater linguistic mystery. According to the inscription itself, copies of this decree were to be set up in every major temple in Egypt, in all 3 scripts. The idea was to spread the message far and wide. Everyone from priests to common people to Greek administrators should see the proclamation in a script they understood. Whether this actually happened everywhere is not definitively known, but the decree clearly orders that a stele of hard stone engraved with the decree in hieroglyphs, demotic, and Greek be placed in each temple. The Rosetta Stone is not unique. It's just the first such artifact found. Because the decree was mass-produced, other copies, or partial copies, have since been discovered. Notably, the Nubeira stele, found in the 1880s, contains the same decree in hieroglyphs and demotic, helping fill some missing lines from the Rosetta Stone's broken top. Another fragment was found at the Temple of Philae. These confirmed that the Rosetta Stone's text was indeed widely distributed. In fact, the Rosetta Stone was probably just one of many identical stelae created and displayed across Egypt. Often mistakenly described as black basalt, the stone is actually a piece of granodiorite, a speckled, coarse-grained igneous rock similar to granite. It has a dark grayish coloration with pinkish flecks. The slab's dimensions are about 112 cm tall, 75 cm wide, and 28 cm thick, 44 x 11 inches. Only the front face is polished and inscribed. The sides and back are rough, since it would have been set into a wall or backing in its original temple context. The Rosetta Stone weighs around 1,676 pounds, approximately 760 kilograms. This massive weight, comparable to a small car, made it challenging to transport. When it first arrived at the British Museum, the floor was too weak to support it, so special accommodations had to be made. It's amazing to think such a heavy object was quarried, carved, and hauled around in ancient times, and later hauled by early 19th century armies as war booty. While there are 3 scripts on the stone, they represent 2 languages. The upper 2 texts are in Egyptian, hieroglyphic and demotic are 2 forms of writing the Egyptian language, and the bottom text is in Greek. All 3 were needed because Egypt in 196 BC was culturally and administratively bilingual. The native priesthood and populace used Egyptian, whereas the government, the Ptolemaic dynasty of Greek origin, conducted affairs in Greek. The stone's creators wanted the message accessible to all important audiences in the kingdom. The stele was originally erected in an Egyptian temple. The decree was issued at Memphis, but it might have stood in a Delta temple near Rosetta. Centuries later, many ancient temples were destroyed or fell into disuse. By the late Roman or Byzantine era, temple stones were often quarried for building material. The Rosetta Stone met that fate. It was reused as a block in a fortress wall. Ottoman Turks had built Fort Julian at a strategic Nile location, unknowingly incorporating this inscribed slab into the masonry. It remained hidden there for probably over 1,000 years. In 1799, French soldiers, part of Napoleon's expedition in Egypt, were enlarging Fort Julian when they stumbled on the stone. They noticed its strange inscriptions and realized it was not ordinary building rock. Lieutenant François Bouchard, the engineer overseeing the work, immediately recognized its potential importance. He halted the demolition and reported the find to the scholarly corps of the French army. It's lucky that Bouchard was both alert and educated. Had the slab been just smashed and tossed aside, we might never have known about this key artifact. Napoleon had brought along a team of scholars, the Institut d'Égypte, to document and study Egypt's antiquities. After its discovery, the Rosetta Stone was transported to Cairo for study. The French scholars made plaster casts and copies of the inscriptions to begin deciphering attempts. They understood immediately that having the Greek text could unlock the others. The stone was treated as a prized scholarly treasure until the French forces had to surrender it. In 1801, the French army in Egypt was defeated by the British and Ottoman forces. Under the Treaty of Alexandria, 1801, the French agreed to. Reportedly, the French general Manu tried to claim the stone as his personal possession to avoid giving it up, but he didn't succeed. The British took custody of the slab, recognizing its importance. The Rosetta Stone was shipped to England, arriving in Portsmouth in February 1802. By June 1802, it was presented to King George III, who then donated it to the British Museum. It went on public display that same year, 1802, and created quite a buzz. As one of the earliest Egyptian antiquities in the museum, which had opened only decades earlier, it drew crowds curious to see the mysterious carved scripts. The Rosetta Stone has been one of the star attractions of the British Museum for over 2 centuries. Amazingly, it's been on public display nearly continuously since 1802. The only time it left the museum's main floor was during World War I, when London was under threat of bombing. In 1917, the museum secretly moved the stone to a secure underground storage to protect it. More on that below. Aside from that wartime precaution, generations of visitors have been able to admire this iconic object year after year. For many decades, the Rosetta Stone sat in the open, not in any glass case. Visitors in the 19th and early 20th centuries were actually allowed to touch the stone, and they did. Museum goers would often run their fingers over the incised hieroglyphs and scripts, tracing the characters as a hands-on experience. This would horrify modern curators, of course. By the later 20th century, curators realized all that handling could damage the artifact, so today it's safely kept behind glass. In World War I, with German bombing raids looming, the British Museum took precautions to safeguard its most important objects. In 1917, the Rosetta Stone was moved 50 feet underground to a hidden location, specifically an unused station of the London Postal Tube Railway, a subterranean mail train line, at Holborn. It remained tucked away there for 2 years, sheltered from the bombs. This clandestine wartime refuge ensured the stone survived the war unscathed. After the war, it was brought back up and returned to public display. In 1972, France got to host the Rosetta Stone, but only for 1 month. The stone was loaned to the Louvre in Paris to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Champollion's 1822 decipherment of hieroglyphs. It was the first time the artifact had been in France since 1801. Throngs of visitors came to see it in Paris. There were even tongue-in-cheek rumors that the French might not return it, but of course they did. After that single month, it went back to the British Museum. The ancient inscriptions aren't the only writing on the Rosetta Stone. It also bears some English text carved on its left and right sides. These were added by the British in the early 1800s to record its capture and donation. One side reads, "Captured in Egypt by the British Army in 1801," and the other side says, "Presented by King George III." This makes the stone a historical document twice over, carrying an ancient message on the front and a colonial-era note on the side. Scholars in England and France began studying copies of the Rosetta Stone's inscriptions almost immediately after its discovery. Progress was slow. It ultimately took 23 years of research, 1799 to 1822, to fully crack the hieroglyphic code. Early on, they could translate the 54 lines of Greek and identified many of the 32 lines of Demotic, the middle text, fairly quickly. However, decoding the 14 lines of hieroglyphs proved challenging. A big hurdle was a mistaken belief that hieroglyphs were purely symbolic. In reality, the writing is largely phonetic, sound-based. Another factor was the rivalry between British and French scholars. They weren't keen on sharing findings at first, each side wanting the honor of the breakthrough. Bit by bit, however, the puzzle pieces fell into place. An English polymath, Thomas Young, was one of the first to make real headway. By 1814, Young had identified that the oval cartouches on the stone enclosed royal names. He successfully deciphered the name Ptolemy, written in hieroglyphs, proving that some hieroglyphic signs recorded sounds, phonetic letters. Young published these findings, demonstrating the hieroglyphic text wasn't purely symbolic, a monumental step forward. His work on picking out names gave later decipherers a critical clue. The final decipherment triumph is credited to François Champollion, a French linguistic prodigy. Champollion, who was also versed in Coptic, the late form of the Egyptian language, built on Young's insights. In 1822, Champollion announced he had deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs. He realized that the hieroglyphs formed an alphabet of sounds for the Egyptian language, not just pictographs. By comparing the texts and using his knowledge of Coptic, Champollion could read the hieroglyphic and demotic versions of the decree. In September 1822, he presented his results in a now famous letter and academic paper, effectively unlocking ancient Egypt's written language. According to legend, Champollion's breakthrough was so exciting that it literally made him faint. One day, as he struggled with the hieroglyphic text, Champollion realized that a particular hieroglyph, a sun disk symbol, was read as Ra, meaning sun, and that this sound figured in royal names like Ramses. This confirmed the phonetic nature of hieroglyphs. Upon this realization, Champollion rushed to his brother's office in Paris and exclaimed, "Je tiens l'affaire! I've got it!" and promptly collapsed unconscious from the shock of success. Though this dramatic fainting episode is sometimes debated, it's an oft-repeated anecdote, perhaps embellished over time. It underscores how momentous the discovery was to him. One might think the Greek, demotic, and hieroglyphic texts on the Rosetta Stone are exact translations, but in fact there are minor differences. Each version was tailored slightly to its script and audience. Some lines or specifics don't perfectly correspond, and there's even a slight date discrepancy between the Egyptian and Greek versions. Because of these nuances, and the general difficulty of translation, experts can produce slightly different English translations of the decree. There is no single official English translation of the Rosetta Stone's inscription that everyone agrees on. Scholars must interpret some damaged sections and choose how to render ancient idioms, so you may see varying translations in books. Fortunately, the overall meaning is clear and consistent. The term Rosetta Stone has entered our language to mean the key to unlocking any puzzling mystery. Since the stone famously unlocked hieroglyphs, people call all sorts of deciphering aids a Rosetta Stone. In science and culture, you'll hear things like, DNA is the Rosetta Stone of genetics, or this fossil is a Rosetta Stone for understanding evolution. The name has been widely borrowed. For example, the European Space Agency's Rosetta spacecraft, launched in 2004, was named in honor of the stone, as it hoped to decode the secrets of a comet. There's also the well-known Rosetta Stone language learning software, aptly named because it helps students decode new languages. In short, Rosetta Stone has become synonymous with any breakthrough that helps decipher or understand something previously inscrutable. The Rosetta Stone's current location in London is not without controversy. Egypt has repeatedly requested its repatriation. In 2003, Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass formally asked the British Museum to return the Rosetta Stone, calling it the icon of our Egyptian identity. Over the years, pressure from Egyptian officials and the public has continued. So far, the British Museum has declined to hand it over, citing legal and historical arguments, much like other disputed artifacts around the world. However, in a gesture of goodwill, the museum did send Egypt a high-quality full-size replica in 2005. The debate over where this priceless object belongs, in Egypt or in Britain, remains ongoing and passionate. For now, the Rosetta Stone still resides in London, where it has captivated visitors for over 2 centuries.